I spent my troubled childhood, as they say, in the risk zone. My mother watched my every step. Any deviation from the norm caused her hysteria. All this because of premature childbirth and silly female fears. I didn't socialize with other children, drew shapeless monsters instead of portraits of mom and dad, and for the holiday, I gave my mother a dead sparrow, whose matchstick legs I pulled out with interest. Also, for some unknown reason, I categorically refused to eat boiled food. Everything that was subjected to boiling meat, soups, porridge caused me a real fit. So I ended up on the list of children threatened with schizophrenia. As a preventive measure, doctors imposed a special regime on me. Walks were strictly scheduled, primitive toys, books illustrative, chewed up letter by letter. They spoke to me cautiously, like with a frightened dog. My mother exaggerated a lot, her bulging eyes from zeal and a round mouth, with which she emphasized every sound, as if I were some kind of idiot. I still remember. Thus, the illness was defeated, or in simpler terms, suppressed. I went to a regular school, like all other children, and my parents breathed a sigh of relief. For 8 years, I lived my life, with its everyday surprises and problems. I remember the day of moving vividly, as if it were recorded. We moved to a new apartment with the appearance of a little sister, whose care my grandmother was called for. We needed more square meters. Gray high-rise building, the smell of urine in the entrance, and broken swings in the yard. But the apartment itself was not bad, and there was much more space. Dragging the last box of things into the apartment, I went to wash my hands. Despite all the rooms being renovated, the bathroom seemed neglected. Dirty ceramic tiles, rust stains, and a dirty bathtub. I turned on the tap to the maximum and immediately screamed from pain and surprise. My hand was scalded with boiling water. The skin reddened. A large watery blister swelled up. I laughed like an idiot then, and then teasingly mocked the disgusted mother, threatening to pierce the blister with a large needle. I told my father that he should check the pipes, but in subsequent times, the water was already at a normal temperature. On the very first night, I woke up late at night, feeling the urge to pee. I shuffled barefoot along the dark corridor, but halfway there, I stopped near the bathroom. The door was ajar, and I was surprised to notice a strange edible smell coming from inside. Without any assumptions, I turned on the light and stepped inside. The bathtub was filled to the brim with some oily water. Shiny circles of grease floated on the surface. Squinting from the bright light, I leaned over this broth and turned my head to the right. Our eyes met. The woman's white, bulging eyes resembled 2 hard-boiled eggs. The bloodless skin seemed covered with a slimy film. From the head, the skin partially peeled off, and blood bubbled on the white bone of the skull. I couldn't scream. My throat seemed swollen. Only a pathetic, humiliating sound came out, and this disgusting thing unexpectedly opened its swollen, thick lips and repeated it exactly after me. I recoiled and would have fallen on my back if there wasn't a wall behind me. Banging my head hard, I rushed for the door, slamming it with all my might, and locked myself in the room. I was shaking. I don't know what was worse, disgust, fear, or the madness of what was happening. I didn't wake anyone up. What would I tell them? How? It seemed to me that if I fell asleep, it would crawl out of the bathtub, crawl on its cooked soft limbs to the bed, and when I opened my eyes, the dead white eyes would be above me. But by morning, it all stopped. Waking up, I headed straight for the bathroom. Like any homegrown horror enthusiast, I was attracted by the daylight. The bathtub was empty, no water, no greasy streaks. I got scolded by my mother for making noise at night. I had to lie about the bump, saying I hit the door in the dark. I think what demoralized me was the feeling of the absurdity of what was happening. A mix of disgust and pity, as if you were looking at a dog lying in the middle of the road with a crushed head, its legs twitching in agony. Whatever it was in the bathroom, it seemed helpless, yet it inspired fear. Remembering my nervous childhood, I was even afraid to joke about such a topic. I couldn't risk being sent to a clinic again, so what was the way out? Not to wash? Call a priest? I believed in crusaders even less than in ghosts. For several nights, nothing happened, although a couple of times I passed by the bathroom at night. There was no smell, no quiet splashing of water. I was sure as long as I was outside that room, everything would be fine. So when we sat down at the table for dinner, and I suddenly looked up and saw in the kitchen doorway a wet, naked corpse, its skin hanging in tattered shreds, I screamed. Tried to. Food came up, and I choked, unable to breathe for a minute. It didn't look like a ghost. She stood there, as real, tangible, and solid as I was. There was not a single hair on her body, a bare pubis, a bald head and legs, which made the seemingly rubberized skin appear even whiter. I'd seen such skin on a beluga whale. Below the knees and elbows, there was no flesh at all, only exposed bones and skin hanging in twisted spirals of scraps. Some palms and soles were still intact. And she smelled like meat soup with spices, like boiled meat. I started laughing, realizing that this smell, which I hadn't had time to eat, made my stomach growl and cramp. They doused me with Grandma's broth, injected something below my lower back, and the wolfish maternal gaze clearly conveyed to my father, "It's happening again." I'm sure I couldn't explain myself. You come home from somewhere, do your thing, live with your opinion on everything, which of course seems to you to be the only right one, and then your life is shattered by something that doesn't fit into any framework and exists on its own like a bad dream. Where the worst thing is the absurdity of what's happening, depriving you of the ability to act sensibly, pick up the phone with a smart face, or consult with a friend. I felt ashamed, but the fear never subsided. At night, I thought about that woman for a long time, and the premonition that I would see her again didn't diminish the anxiety and powerless anger. Yes, I saw her again in the morning, when I went to rinse my head under the cold stream of water. She was still lying calmly in the bathtub, and then her hand, half bearing the bone, suddenly rose above the water and pressed against the wall with softened fingers, like digested sausages. I think she was trying to scribble something on the wall, but the fingers just bent, and then the flesh spread, leaving only thin bones. Horn plates of fallen nails floated in the water. I puked outside the bathroom door. Hello, childhood. I was nauseated again by boiled food. I couldn't even look at boiled chicken, that white, pimply skin covered in slime. If you take a piece of boiled meat and pull it apart into fibers, it looks like the skin peels off in thin strips. The nauseating soup smell haunted me all day. Now at night I felt like I was being boiled alive, but not all at once, gradually. A strange hot heaviness, as if someone was putting hot metal pancakes on my arm, then on my stomach, then on my legs. It seemed that if I had raised my hands to my face then, I would have seen only scalded white stumps. The bathroom was right behind the wall. I knew she was there, and that if she really wanted to, she would crawl to me anywhere, dragging the remains of her legs behind her. I hadn't gotten out of bed for 5 days. Sometimes my consciousness would clear, and I would want to run away somewhere, nauseated by what I had become. And then there was Grandma with her herbs and recipes. She said that terror had attached itself to me, like terror chooses you for its own reasons and sits on your shoulders. Until you deal with it, it torments you in every possible way. And I grew up at risk susceptible, that's why it all. Terror isn't exactly omnipresent, it's part of you. And if you think that the walls of your own room or even an underground bunker will save you, it's just a great act of self-delusion, like a cross against a vampire. The dead don't care about their interrupted past. Probably for them life still goes on, and they just fill the voids that have formed. I asked my father to find out who the previous owner of the apartment was. If anything had happened here, at least ask the neighbors. Those who sold us the apartment are greedy mongrels. They won't say a word. Father remained silent for a while, and then, without asking a single question, got up and left. That's how we found out. Her name was Grace. She was 26 years old. She lived here with her little son, by the way. Namesakes, he's also Oliver. She left her husband, a binge-drinking alcoholic who had served 2 terms for theft and rape, and then suddenly found religion. Some sect took him in. Neighbors said he often came here, tried to break down the door, and when he couldn't, he shouted all sorts of nasty things about his wife, that she worked as a prostitute, sucked off drivers for 100 rubles until the woman in tears opened up to him so that no one would hear. He beat her. The neighbors knew that too. No one expected that. Well, the eternal excuse. His roof started leaking badly, and Grace apparently threatened to call the police. They say he first scalded her with boiling water, splashed it from the kettle onto her face. Whether he entered a drunken rage or something else liked it. Maybe how she screamed, but he locked the woman in the bathroom and put all the pots he found on a big fire, filled with water. Then, already in the bathroom, he turned on the hot water and began playfully drowning his wife until the water boiled. Grace was still alive when she was scalded, time after time. The subdued neighbors only heard the drunken shouts of the man, something about sinner and boiling tar. No one attached much importance to this, but the 3-year-old boy was choking with tears in the next room. When the police broke down the door and got inside, they say Grace lived for a couple more minutes. A bathrobe belt was wrapped around her neck. They tried to remove it, and it came off easily with the skin. It was already impossible to touch her. They removed the clothes together with the skin. People who removed the body from the bathroom say they fished her out in parts, like boiled fish from soup. The peeled skin and clumps of hair stuck to the walls were scooped into a bag. The neighbors came to their senses, mentioned the son, and rushed to look for him. They found him in the kitchen, a curled up, embryo-like child's body lay in a tall enamel pot. I was empty. I don't remember it being reported in the news or discussed among ourselves. Even the neighbors acted as if nothing had happened. It's then that you realize most keenly that someone else's death is just sick for the living. And you know, more than that jerk, I hated Grace. Why is everything blamed on her? And what does it have to do with me at all? Her fish-like eyes expressed nothing. No requests came from her mouth, but she needed me for some reason. On my last night at home, I lay on the bed, covering my eyes with one hand, the other hanging down to the floor. The smell of meat filled my nostrils, a moist, soft touch to the palm, as if a wet dog's nose were poking at it. We don't have any dogs. I agreed without argument to be taken to the clinic, to get treated as if. My mother moaned that they hadn't protected me. My father wouldn't look me in the eye. Grandma kept lamenting about her terror, and I had no idea what their suffering had to do with me. And now, it seems, it's all behind me. It wasn't me. Right now, I'm just lying on the cool, crisp sheet, thinking about all sorts of nonsense. I even miss studying, let alone my friends. I hear the quiet footsteps of the nurse approaching to check the drip, then a draft because she's leaning over me to adjust the pillow, and I open my eyes. Blind white eyes, surrounded by heavy lids. A swollen, wet hand gently descends on my cheek. Oliver, these cracked lips say, revealing teeth like a horse's skull. A mouth smiling endlessly. Yes, I say wearily, closing my eyes again. Yes, Mom. It happened a long time ago. I was about 10 years old then, but I remembered that incident for the rest of my life. I lived with my mom back then. I didn't have a dad. My parents got divorced. My mom worked as a cashier in a 24-hour store and often had to work night shifts. So one of those nights, after having a snack as usual, I lay down to watch cartoons. Soon my eyes started to close, and I slowly began to drift off to sleep. At that moment I heard dogs howling outside, which made me feel uneasy. I turned over to the other side, covering myself with a blanket, trying to fall asleep anyway, but the dogs seemed to go mad, howling even louder. Their howling irritated me, and I couldn't attempt to sleep anymore. I quickly got out of bed and turned on the light. Sitting there, I wondered, why are they howling like that? What's happening out there? I had heard from adults many times that dogs howl at the dead. I started to feel scared. I called my mom at work and told her everything. She started to reassure me, saying there was nothing to be afraid of, telling me that they communicate like that, and that I shouldn't worry, telling me to go to bed. I calmed down, lay back in bed, and fell asleep very quickly. I don't know how long I slept, but I woke up from hearing some noise in another room. I couldn't make out what it was. I got up quietly, approached the door, opened it a crack, and peeked into the hallway. There was no one there. All the lights were off. And I thought if it was my mom, she wouldn't be wandering around in the dark. So what was it then? I slowly began to move down the hallway towards the light switch, and the noise continued. It seemed like someone was turning everything upside down in that room. Turning on the light, I felt more awake. I approached the door of that room, but the noise stopped. I couldn't hear anything, so I decided to open the door. I kicked it with my foot. It opened, but there was no one there. I walked in, turned on the light. Everything was in its place. Nothing was touched. But then where did that noise come from? I stood there for a little while, turned off the light, turned around to leave when I heard someone or something scurrying from one corner to another behind me. At this point, I couldn't take it anymore. I screamed and ran back to my room, slamming the door shut behind me. I couldn't sleep until morning. My mom came in the morning, laughed at me hearing my story, saying I made it all up, and sent me to school. The next night, my mom was home. We had dinner, washed up, and went to bed. This time, I slept with my mom. Just as we were falling asleep, suddenly, just like that night, the dogs started howling again. I jumped, saw my mom also tossing and turning, and they howled louder and more desperately. My mom couldn't take it. She got up and went to the window. Seeing nothing, she lay back down in bed. We both lay there, staring at the ceiling. It was impossible to sleep like this. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed some movement in the corner. It, or whatever it was, I don't know, started moving from one corner towards the door. I screamed. My mom jumped up. She saw it too, turned on the light, but it all disappeared. We were genuinely scared. We decided to sleep with the light on. But we couldn't fall asleep. We tossed and turned. We lay there in complete silence. The dogs stopped howling, and we both distinctly heard a whisper in the corner, but we couldn't make out what it was saying. I turned my head to that corner. I saw some black spot there. It was swaying back and forth and whispering quickly and indistinctly. My mom took my hand and said, "Don't scream, be quiet," and started to recite the Lord's Prayer. It started whispering louder and thrashing around in the corner. Then it started darting from side to side. It was horrifying. I froze in terror, peering out from under the covers and clutching onto my mom tighter. My mom kept reciting the prayer. It started hissing and jumping onto the bed. I screamed. My mom didn't stop reciting. She just squeezed my hand harder. And then we heard a distinct female voice. It spoke in my mom's voice, "Hush. Don't be afraid. Don't scream." I had a hysterical fit. I screamed, cried. My mom covered my mouth with her hand and kept reciting. This creature would appear in one corner, then another, and constantly whispering, laughing. This horror lasted until dawn. When it began to dawn, it with a squeak and giggles darted somewhere into the corner and disappeared. On the same day, my mom brought a priest. He blessed all the corners of the room and told my mom to hang an icon in that corner. The next night, we heard a malicious hissing. It was scratching against the wall. It felt like it was trapped there and couldn't get out. My mom got up. We had holy water and began to sprinkle water in the corner and recite the prayer. It hissed, and there was a TV in that corner on a table. Then it started squeaking, and that TV fell to the floor. My mom finished the prayer, and everything disappeared. It didn't appear again. This story is real. I still don't know what it was. They say it's a house spirit. I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. But I'll never forget that night. So I'm writing a story to you for the first time because something like this happened to me for the first time. Let me describe the situation a bit. I live with my grandmother, mother, and sister in one apartment. The apartment is old, 3 rooms and a kitchen, all furnished for old people, meaning an old cupboard with dusty crystal and plates, creaky wooden floors, carpets on the walls, an ancient bath. Well, we're not up for renovations. The ceilings are just unbelievably high, about 4 meters. Grandpa died a long time ago. I barely remember him. My father left when I was 6. My sister was 1. And recently, our aunt, my mom's older sister, stopped by with her daughter Beatrice. So she came to visit for a week. Her daughter was going to apply to the local university. It turns out there's this incredible concentration of women in one apartment. On this day, I returned from school earlier. It was quite cold outside, so I was driven home by the cold and some vague feeling that I urgently needed to get home. A sense of alarm. I come home, the alarm only intensifies. Without even taking off my shoes, I enter the living room and see a scene in the far room. Next to the bed, Beatrice is lying unconscious. I rush to her, start shaking her, and then I realize we're not alone. I see something inexplicable. You know how they show invisible beings in movies? The silhouette is visible, but it's completely transparent. I grab Beatrice and drag her across the floor into the living room, slamming the door to the room shut. Thankfully, the interior doors are equipped with small bolts. The invisible thing starts making noise and whimpering in the room, not too loudly, but enough to be terrifying. I drag Beatrice into the 3rd room, farther away from there. I try to revive her. Then, finally, my mother and grandmother arrive. I quickly explain what happened. Beatrice comes to her senses. I explain to my mother that something remains in the room, although it's quiet now. I don't understand my further actions. Where did I know what to do? I took a hose with water, dragged it to the room where this something remained. I needed to lure it out, and I knew how. The room was quiet, and at first glance, no one was there. But it's here. I know it. The water starts with a powerful pressure, and I start watering the walls up to the ceiling from the hose. Yes, it's here, and when it gets under the water stream, it squeals and runs around. I felt safe and chased this crap around the room, as it seemed to me at that moment, for 30 minutes. The ceiling, the walls, the carpet, everything was flooded with water. With further actions, I managed to drive this thing into the bathroom and lock it there, having previously turned on the hot water. After a few hours, the screams subsided. Someone knocked on the door from the bathroom, and a polite voice asked to open it. I opened it. An old lady, dry, in a pink blouse with gray curly hair. I didn't let her out of the bathroom. I demanded explanations. The old lady was kindly smiling, explaining that she wanted to take Beatrice because she needed something to eat. Eat? Beatrice? And here I am, standing at the threshold of the bathroom, lecturing the old lady about how people should not be eaten. And she shrugged and said that you could because they're delicious. Delicious. Damn it, people. I shook this old lady out of the apartment by her blouse. She just smiled and said that I was wrong not to agree with her. That, like, when you live with mine, you'll understand that there's nothing tastier than human flesh. I even followed her as she left the building. How she got into a blue dirty minibus. How she turned around and winked at me, looking at me from the window on the 4th floor, and smiled. Widely smiled, with a huge mouth full of sharp teeth. And then I woke up. Just an ordinary me. who has long lived alone. I don't have any aunt, and I've never lived in such an apartment. But I wouldn't have written you this whole story if I hadn't seen today a blue dirty minibus with an old lady in pink who winked at me and smiled. People are delicious echoed in my head.